Thank you for this opportunity to meet with you and share. Ngayo imarwaraman and ngayo mandajara nyigana nganga. Ngayo imarwaraman and ngayo mandajara, as I said, nyigana. So in my language, I said, good morning. I'm in Broome, which is my home. But in my language, when I introduce myself, I go ngayo imarwaraman, which means I am a woman who belongs to the Marwara, the Fitzroy River, in the Kimberley region of Western Australia. So in terms of my relationship with the river, I'm with a moral obligation to protect this river, not just so that the river can live, but the river can flow. I'm a traditional custodian from the Fitzroy River. I live in the Kimberley. I work nationally and globally, particularly around water and water justice. But these two elements are heavily connected in terms of climate justice and water justice. Indigenous knowledge, Indigenous wisdom, particularly from Australia, is Indigenous science. So in terms of the work I do, multidisciplinary scientist, working across the whole nation, very much passionate about land, water, people. Have a part-time position with the University of Notre Dame as a professor and chair of Indigenous knowledges. I also am the chair of the Marwara Fitzroy River Council, which occupies basically all of my life because we have a duty of care to protect the river. And from that perspective, recognising multi-species justice. So it's not just about justice for human beings, but multi-species justice. Rivers to have rights as living ancestral beings, birds, plants, all of those things standing up and having a voice. This is a very interesting question you're posing about water security in our country and, particularly around sustainable population and this mantra that we have from the federal government, which is grow, grow, grow. And in a time of climate change and climate crisis and climate wars, what we should be looking at, because these water systems are changing. There is not the water security that we thought was there, many, many years ago. So this trajectory of let's, continue to keep inflation up, let's continue to bring more people in, let's continue to development is really contraindicated to what we're actually seeing as Indigenous people living on a big system like the Marwara or the Fitzroy River watershed catchment in the Kimberley. These systems are changing right before our eyes. I think one of the things to be thinking about is why rivers are so important, not just in our country, but globally. And you can see that there's been some leadership shown through the Wanganui, the Whanganui. Then you've got the Yarra or the Birrawong in Melbourne, where people are looking at these rivers and saying, they are so beneficial and so necessary for our lifeways, our life enjoyment, that we need to start to think about how we see a different set of values, how we value these place-based entities, which are rivers. We call them living water systems that connect each and every one of us to ecological systems that provide life, whole life, make life. So I think one of the big things is to really take a moment in time and really think about just development, particularly around water, sustainable populations, and really think about how are we going to do a different way of having business in our country where there's equity and justice for our farmers, but that we are operating these sorts of systems thinking within a world that knows that water is changing, the lifeways of water, the ability to have surplus water, that's all really no longer on the table. When you look at the system science and it's saying that these systems are drying up, that food is not being replenished, I think we really need to have a pause and start to think about what does sustainable development look like, what in terms of sustainable populations, because as Indigenous people, this was front and centre of our world. We always had to think about, okay, how do we manage our estates? How do we have a sustainable population? How do we transition? What is the right fit in terms of the environments that we're living? I mean, we come from a country that's called, I love a sunburnt country, drought and flooding rain, and now what we're seeing with climate wars and climate chaos is that these systems are changing. So we cannot, as human beings, continue to treat living water systems as they do not matter. They do matter, they're critical. Water is life, it holds life, it gives life. So the point I'm making is, as Commissioner for Water at the beginning of the year and seeing all of these different people come into the play, farmers, miners, state governments, bureaucrats, we're all in a moment in time where we are all focused on the Murray-Darling Basin. What can that teach us? What can that show us of what the past developments have been. And so one of the things is we're in a process right now with the Australian National University on the 31st of January, looking at creating a global dialogue on what does water justice mean? Can we have a water justice day globally? It cannot be business as usual. We cannot sustain the populations we currently have in this country. And what I'm seeing, particularly from reports from the Productivity Commission around cost of living, is that we cannot currently cope with and deal with and provide sustenance and well-being to our current population before we continue the trajectory of grow. Yeah, I think population growth in this country is something that we really need to focus on. And as I said, what we're dealing with is the politics of economics. And so what we're seeing in terms of determining whether or not something's sustainable or not is that somehow the aspirations of government don't seem to be aligning up with our communities. And this is communities all over this country. And so there are questions being asked by our fellow Australians in terms of why are we on a trajectory of growth when all of us are suffering and we don't seem to be able to manage our cost of living, things are blowing out. Where was the saying that we were and still are a lucky country with a fair go for all? And if we can't look after the people we currently have, then there definitely is a big issue in terms of can we continue to grow at the rate of expansion that the federal and the state governments and the territories want us to grow? Because in the back of my mind is also a question of duty of care. We have very close neighbours in the Pacific Island, and they're watching what Australia's doing with these big just development projects and saying, what you're doing is very unjust. What you're doing is assisting our island states to sink, and it doesn't seem to be that Australia cares very much for anybody else. So one of the questions that's come to me from Pacific Islanders is, okay, if Australia continues to grow, business as usual, more mines, more development, and it impacts on climate justice and our right to live in the Pacific, then can we come and live in Australia as climate refugees? So these are important dialogues that are being started now. The idea that we need to think about our neighbours, that we're not contained on this planet to just be thinking about Australia. This politics of economics is driving not only unjust development, but this narrative of grow, more people, keep inflation up. Everything is connected population-wise, because it's not just water, it's land, water, people, and the environment. And all of these things are right out of whack, as I said. As a result of climate change, we as Indigenous people living on our lands are seeing that these systems are changing and they're not producing in their normal way. So if these systems are already stressed, this idea of grow and bringing more people in does not seem to match how we're going to live not just a sustainable development, but sustainable lifeways and sustainable livelihoods. And having that ethics of care, then there's going to be a huge cost in terms of where do climate refugees go. I think it's a time to sort of have a bit of a pause, to think about where we're going as a nation, to think about how we can grow so rapidly when we do not have the capacity to support our fellow Australians right now. So I think this is a very big question that really needs to be at the forefront in terms of what does sustainable lifeways, sustainable livelihoods look like for our nation when the systems are currently imploding and we do not have the capacity to service and satisfy the basic living conditions of fellow Australians right now. All of these are very, very big questions that need serious answers. And I think one of the things is understanding the complexity of what we're talking about, but being able to bring Indigenous wisdom, Indigenous thinking into how can we have a pathway forward, and how come these big multinational companies are profiting on oil and gas and none of that economy is flowing down to the people, it's trickling offshore, and it's the multinational corporations and not our government who are profiting by these unjust developments. Oh, I think SPA definitely is an organisation worth supporting, and I really appreciate and value the way that members have dialogue and challenge the system and put things out there into the media and what we call wake up the snake. How do we wake up the consciousness of the people to bring the people with us? And I think that some of the writers we have, on SPA are really out there, really pushing the boundaries, challenging, different ways of thinking and just getting this knowledge out there. So I think part of what we do, and this is one of the things I say to people, is we have to be brave. We have to be brave, we have to be realistic, we need to make sure that whatever we decide is evidence-based and that there is a way of bringing the people with us in terms of the stories we're telling. And so I'm very excited by the way members are able to publish, to get inside these media outlets and have a voice. Well, I'm just really excited by the level of people that you have on the membership. I mean, it is indeed a great honour to see the patrons who have gone before me, that have come from, different lived experiences, different worldviews, but all coming with the same intent of how can we live in this land in a sustainable way that can ensure that each and every one of us reaches our full potential. To think of Indigenous people from this country as really deserving of the way that we start to share our wealth creation, start to share about custodianship. So for me, I'm very excited to know some of the people that are inside SPA who was very encouraging and saying, look, Anne, it's time for us to hear from Indigenous people, from Indigenous wisdom, from Indigenous leadership, because at the end of the day, we are all fellow Australians and we want the best for our nation. But importantly, we want the best for our young people, Indigenous and not, to dream that they can have a future. And so that's what's motivated me to come on and join SPA and be very, very honoured by the legacy of those gone before me and believe that I do have a contribution to make. But I'm really, really blessed to know that we've got exciting people who are out there challenging the system, writing really provocative media stories, and really going, it's about all of us, for all of us, now and into the future. One of the reasons why did I accept being a patron, and the fact that I believe that this Indigenous wisdom, which has come from the beginning of time, is so relevant for modernity. In all of the areas that we're looking at, I was really keen to see how I could bring some of my systems thinking into SPA that I can, share and people can see my work and they go, okay, this is what our patron's doing, and opening up dialogue nationally, globally. I'm working, at a range of different levels, particularly in terms of globally, working with other Indigenous people. And we're sharing our information because we realise that we are living on one planet, Mother Earth, and that what is happening at the moment, particularly in terms of climate change, climate chaos, is that we need to come together so that we can give future generations and current generations, because young people are living now, they're not just in the future. How can we wrap around our young people? How can we bring this philosophical way of seeing and being in the world so that we see that as Indigenous wisdom keepers? How can we amplify this concept that we come from a world of we, about the collective good, and not me, the individualistic needs and greeds? And so I kind of figure that what I can contribute to SPA in my dialogue, in my patronage to this beautiful organisation, is that we can come in and agree that we need collective wisdom, and that if Indigenous philosophy, Indigenous laws do not inform our systems thinking, then we will have a gap and we will likely meet our own demise.